Understanding how damage is calculated in Monster Hunter Now can help you make the right builds for your playstyle. It can help you decide which skills you want to equip to maximize your damage output. Luckily, the way damage is calculated in Monster Hunter Now is very simple to understand. So in this video, I'll be taking you guys back to school for a Monster Hunter math class, and we'll be taking a closer look at how damage is actually calculated by breaking down its mathematical formula. We will be discussing how motion values and hit zone values affect damage, and later on we will also break down the new critical element skill and how best to use it. By the end of this video, you'll be left saying,
"Whoa, math, that's amazing!"
Things might get a bit complicated as we start adding skills that modify damage, but don't get overwhelmed. It's actually very simple if you understand the basics.
It's back to school, folks.
Now, damage basically boils down into two things: your raw and elemental attack power. If we take a look at our weapons, we will see that it has raw and elemental stats. If the monster you're hunting is weak to that specific element, then the total damage you will be dealing is the sum of your weapon's raw attack power plus its elemental attack power. Then if you have elemental attack skills in your build, it just adds it on top of your weapon's elemental stat. But if you're hunting a monster that is not weak to your weapon's element, then you're only dealing the weapon's raw stat. Well, now you might be wondering why this damage number is not the number that's appearing on your screen when you're attacking. It's so much less than that. That's because your attacks are also affected by motion values and hit zone values. Thanks to mhn.quest, we can actually see the exact numbers for these values. But what exactly are these numbers supposed to mean? Well, let me explain. Motion values basically determine how strong your attack is, and it varies depending on the attack you use. Take for example the lance's mid-thrust and high thrust. The mid-thrust only has a motion value of 26, while the high thrust has a motion value of 29. The higher the value, the higher the damage, because this number represents the percentage of your weapon's total damage. In other words, the mid-thrust only deals 26% of your weapon's total damage, while the high thrust deals 29% of your weapon's total damage. With this in mind, you'll want to use your weapon's attacks with high motion values to deal optimal damage. But it doesn't end there. Your damage is also modified depending on where you hit the monster. If you hit the monster on a weak spot, you'll get more damage. But if you hit the monster on a non-weak spot, you'll get less damage. And we can see those specific hit zone values on this chart from mhn.quest. Hitting the Puke Puke on the head adds a 1.4% damage multiplier to your attacks. Now, putting all these together, we now get the exact number you see on your screen. Now, what about critical attacks? How does crit work in Monster Hunter Now? If you have a crit build or your weapon has high affinity, your attacks have the chance to crit. Critical hits add a 25% damage multiplier to the sum of your weapon's raw and elemental attack power. We will now add a 1.25 times multiplier to the formula. Take your raw and elemental attack stats plus any bonus elemental attack skills you have in your build, then multiply it by the critical modifier of 1.25, and then multiply the motion values and hit zone values, and you get your total damage. Now notice how this critical modifier scales with your elemental attack skills. And you can even boost up this 1.25 modifier if you add critical boost skills in your build. Now that is how you calculate damage in Monster Hunter Now.
That's basically the basics.
With the basics out of the way, I hope you guys are still with me through all this math, because now we will make this formula a bit more complicated as we break down the new skill, critical element. Now it says here, critical element only affects your weapon's elemental stat, and it increases when landing critical hits. Now initially my theory was that critical element scales with elemental attack skills, because if we look at the text for elemental attack skills, it says here that it increases your weapon's elemental value, and if we look at our build stats, the number shown here is your weapon's total elemental stat combined with your elemental attack skills. Then if we look at how the critical modifier affects your damage, it first takes the sum of your raw and elemental attack together before applying the multiplier. So my theory was that the critical element modifier applies to this total number you see on your build, which is the sum of our weapon's elemental stat plus elemental attack skills. But unfortunately, I was wrong. I did some tests, and unfortunately it only applies to your weapon's base elemental stat. I tested critical element level 1 with a build with elemental attack level 4, and the formula looks like this. We first multiplied the elemental stat of your weapon with the critical element modifier, then add the elemental attack skills after that. If we max out critical element, it gives us a massive 80% buff to our weapon's base elemental attack power. Now normally you would only have access to crit element level 3, unless you equip a Silver Rathalos weapon as well. But even then, having just crit element level 3 with weapons with high elemental stats already gives us a higher total damage than having elemental 5 alone. The main problem with this skill is that you'll need to have a build with high affinity to make this build consistent. We'll need to use weapons with high affinity and pair it with a bunch of weakness exploit and crit eye skills if we want to maximize this new skill. We can still make builds with elemental attack 5 and crit element, but it won't be the best build. Elemental attack 5 would still give us a flat damage buff, and we won't be critting as consistently, so we can treat crit element as a big bonus whenever we do crit. According to mhn.quest, looks like the meta is shifting to a crit meta with crit element and crit boost mixed together. At first, I had a hard time reconciling the fact that critical element does not scale with elemental attack.
That's impossible!
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
Because maybe on the back of my head, I wanted it to scale with elemental attack so badly because I already invested a lot of time crafting and upgrading elemental attack armor pieces. And if critical element with pure affinity builds will be the new meta, then all my efforts upgrading elemental attack armor pieces to grade 8 just to unlock their drift slots, and then walking and grinding just to get elemental attack drift skills on them were apparently just a waste of time, refining parts, and drift stones. But hey, the grind never stops, am I right? It's just that now I have to wait a couple of weeks to get more refining materials to make these new builds. So there. Now you guys have the basic understanding of how damage is calculated in Monster Hunter now, and you guys can now somewhat understand the numbers you see on mhn.quest when you compare builds or when you click auto optimize. There are other skills that I did not discuss in this video that also affect your damage as well. Some skills will only affect your raw damage, and some will only affect your shelling or your file damage. But now that I have shown you the basics, you can now test out these skills for yourself and share your findings in the comments. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick math class, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe. But that's it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one.